Welcome to Sputnik, orbiting the world with me, George Galloway. Gayatri missed the bus, but she'll be along in a minute. The British government in the 1980s destroyed the miners' union. It was mere collateral damage, the destruction of the mining industry, which still had 1,000 years of coal under its feet, the mining communities in their hundreds of thousands, then left on the post-industrial scrap heap, and of course the country itself, which thereafter was dependent on imported coal, oil under other people's countries, and for which we had to be ready to go to war, although foreign-owned nuclear power plants were briefly touted as an alternative. Now, 30 years later, the same British government is stealing the miners' pension funds. Peter Stefanovic is a rising star in British politics, and he's using his advocacy skills to speak up for the miners. And Leslie Moore is one of those retired miners whose pension fund has been nicked. Peter, Leslie, thanks for joining us. Peter, first of all, just tell us what this scandal is.
Thank you, George. I'm a very black and white sort of guy. I look at things as right and wrong. And when Les came to me with his story a week ago now, I literally rocketed from astonishment to anger to absolute outrage. What we're talking about here is a pension fund that our miners, national heroes, paid into over generations with their blood, with their sweat, many with their lives. All of these guys have got health-related conditions now. They pay this money into their pension fund. We come to 1994, and under John Major's government, he decides to privatise the coal industry, and the government says to the miners, we'll underwrite your pension, but we want a whopping extortionate 50% of any surplus, and our miners are railroaded into this agreement. Now, putting that into context, successive governments, through that agreement, have robbed, and robbed is the only way to look at this, £8 billion at least, 8 billion quid from our miners' pension fund. And we've recently seen this response to an FOI request from the Treasury saying the fund has not cost the government a single penny. So the government takes, successive governments take 8 billion quid from the miners. It doesn't cost them a penny. At the same time, over the same period, we see governments bailing out greedy bankers, negligent bankers, to the tune of £124 billion at least. It's an absolute scandal, an absolute outrage.
I had never heard of this until you started advocating for it. Which is one of the reasons why I wanted you on the show. Yeah. Why has this been ignored?
I've got to tell you, when they came to me with their story, and I read this, I personally felt this sense of shame because, firstly, how could we do this to national heroes that kept our homes, our hospitals, our schools warm, that kept the wheels of our industry turning, working in the most incomprehensibly dangerous conditions? I felt personally ashamed. I knew nothing about this. And then I go to research it. There's very little out there. And I had to come to the conclusion that mainstream media has deliberately kept this story away from the public. I threw down the gauntlet after I put out those two films to mainstream media, and I said, who has the to report this absolute travesty of justice? Two people contact me. One, Steve Topple at the Canary, who we both admire immensely, and your producer, Tim Allen. And here we are. And that says something about mainstream media and where to go for the truth.
But from little acorns, great oaks can grow.
Do you know something? Something that really struck me about the two films that I put out was this. Over the last week, I've been inundated with messages from miners all over the country that have said, Peter, thank you for putting those films out. We felt that the British people had abandoned us, the miners. That's not true, because when you look at the literally hundreds of comments on the films that I've put out, there's this outpouring of love, affection,
Yes.
respect and
Yes.
admiration for our miners, because the British people know what our miners did for us.
Leslie, I'm an honorary member of the National Union of Mine Workers
I know we are,
since
George.
1982.
Mardy Lodge.
Yes, South Wales area, Mardy Lodge. Their pain means a lot to me. There are not many days that go by when I don't remember the great battles that I stood with you on. This is a very considerable insult added to the gigantic injury the mining communities have already suffered, isn't it?
It's a tremendous, an absolutely tremendous outrage. There's no other way of saying it apart from it being an outrage. No other section of society would have been treated like this.
No.
It is a punishment. And what happened is the establishment has decided to punish the miners all the way to the graves. And they're doing it financially through our pension scheme. They tried it earlier, as you will probably know, through the Ridley Commission.
Yeah.
And then once the pits have gone and privatising, they still wanted to punish us. They wanted us to punish us for daring to stand up and fight for our jobs and communities. That's what they've done, and they're doing it through our pension scheme.
As you
and
say,
they're doing
all
it
the
under
way to the
everybody's
grave.
noses.
All the way to the grave.
That's right.
£8 billion.
Well,
Imagine
that's an
what that
estimate.
could have done in the mining communities, many of which are basically heaps now of desolated people.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to physically make the analogy too strong, but the situation that's been left in the mining communities is now absolutely desperate. Mass unemployment, social problems, drug and alcohol abuse, hopelessness. £8 billion could have transformed that.
Yeah, that's only a conservative figure, 8 billion. It is not the actual full figure, because I believe we're actually, if we had an actuary look at it, I think we'll be looking at 12 billion.
I think it could be as high as 20 billion. Let's remember, we're talking about successive governments here. I think Steve Topple reported yesterday that in 2003, Tony Blair's government milked this pension for 400 million quid at a point when stocks and shares had taken a dive. They almost bankrupted the miners' pension fund. We're talking about a Blairite government here doing just that.
Well, that doesn't
surprise
me,
us, no.
Of course. But how did the union agree, perhaps they had no choice, agree to this ploy by which they took 50% of any surplus?
They didn't actually agree to it. What happened was, after the strike of 95, there was 5 elected trustees and 5 appointed trustees. The 5 elected trustees were all NUM. The government then removed an NUM trustee, saying that the UDM, because of the numbers of its members...
This was the breakaway scab union that worked to break the strike.
I'm going to correct you a little bit there. I don't call it a union. I don't give it that credibility. It's a government agency, George. What happened was, David Hart came, Margaret Thatcher's advisor. He provided the funding. He provided the expertise. He was the designer of the breakaway. He was the man who educated them what to do. So seeing as it's government agency, well, Margaret Thatcher's advisor, and private money, it's their agent. They imposed a government agent onto the board, which was Neil Greatex, which has been in papers not long back for. He was stealing money from an old folks' home. He provided the vote to give the government access to our pension scheme.
50% of your surplus.
Yes,
you know,
he
George,
was the man who did it.
Now that this issue is in the public domain, there are serious questions that need to be asked about how this agreement came into being. I've only been involved a week, and from what I can see, trying to put the pieces together, we've got the government of the day, John Major's government, being a party to the agreement. We've got British Coal, but at that point in time, we're still part of the nationalised industry. So we've got the government and British Coal, one and the same.
Same thing.
And then we've got a handful of trustees of the pension fund. Now, how on earth did a handful of trustees to this pension fund get involved in this deal? Was there no actuary report to tell them what...
And one of those, you're a legal man, these trustees had a fiduciary duty to the members whose funds they were.
And you know, one would imagine that the trustees of a pension fund would have access to a whole building full of actuaries chomping out figures who would be saying, hang on a moment, if we do this deal, it's unlikely to cost the government anything because sadly miners have a short life expectancy, but they'll be milking us for billions of pounds forever. It's extraordinary.
Yeah, go on, Les, yeah.
There actually was an actuary's report. Wilson and Wyatt was an in-house actuary service for the government. What their report suggested a sharing of 15% for the government and 85% for the NUM. What happened was they totally ignored it.
Was that report shared with the trustees of the fund?
Well, I don't know about that.
So the government's own in-house actuary recommended the government get 15% of any surplus in your pension fund, but they actually took 50.
The information is in the public domain. It's not something I've just conjured up. It is there for everybody to see. Everybody in this country can Google it.
That makes me even more outraged, George, because let's put this into context.
You're on here.
There is an actuary report, then, you believe, obtained by the government recommending an 85-15% split, which in itself is outrageous. Was that report shared with the trustees of the pension fund? If it was, why was this information not disseminated to the miners? And if it wasn't shared with the trustees, why the hell didn't the trustees get their own actuary report? You know, it's an absolute outrage. There needs to be a public inquiry, George, into how this disgraceful agreement came into being.
And I think that's a demand that we can win.
Yeah, I agree.
It's one thing that the miners' union was destroyed, that the mining industry was destroyed, that the community was destroyed. But as Leslie put it in very, very eloquent terms there, they are determined to hunt and punish the miners all the way to the grave. As you put it, they've got a short life expectancy. What happens next? What's your next stage?
There is going to be a rally in Liverpool, which Les has arranged for the 27th of September.
Yeah, you will probably be at the conference, will you, George?
No, but I can be at your rally. Unfortunately, I'm not yet welcome in the Labour Party.
It would be incredible if you could be there. But just to put this into context, I suggested to Les, why don't you make your rally a march? And he said, we can't do that because so many of the surviving members are now invalids. Their knees are knackered. They've got chronic chest conditions because of the coal dust they inhale. They can't march.
I've been down many coal mines, and you correctly described it earlier. These men are heroes.
National heroes.
And they've been robbed. Gentlemen, thanks for coming on board the Sputnik. Coming up next, coups to the left of us, jokers to the right. Just who is stuck in the middle with the people of Latin America? Stay tuned. Welcome back to Sputnik, and Gayatri's bus finally arrived. The Olympic Games have come and gone, leaving the people of Brazil undoubtedly worse off, and a new dictatorship being formed. In Argentina, a similar coup is being carried through against the former president and her political allies.
In Venezuela, all-out civil conflict remains a possibility as US-backed opposition forces close in for a kill on President Maduro. In fact, everywhere except Nicaragua, the left, so recently hegemonic, is on the retreat.
Joining us now to discuss the whys and the wherefores is Dr. Juan Grigera of the University College London. Dr. Juan, thanks for coming on board the Sputnik. Do you accept our thesis, for a start, that the left is everywhere on the retreat, with the exception of Nicaragua?
Yes, so let me thank you for having me here. And so I think it's the great question of today. So what has happened with the so-called pink tide? Why it's retreating everywhere? What's happened? Why is that we are like witnessing the end of a decade of left or progressive governments in the region that were certainly an exception in the world. So I would like, though, to to question a bit the ways this is happening, because this is interesting as well, and the ways we characterize what's happening. So I would begin by saying we shouldn't use the word dictatorship so easily, because the region knew proper dictatorships, I mean military power, and violent military power that led to the disappearance and torture and killing of many left militants. So what we are witnessing now is something that's probably could be called soft coups in the case of Brazil, in the case of Honduras, certainly the case of Paraguay. Those are tweakings or ways of using the democratic system in a way that's fairly undemocratic, probably. In the case of Argentina, though, we should see basically the electoral defeat of the former president. So the characterization is certainly right, and I agree that we should explain what's going on with why.
Just before you leave that
please.
point, then, if someone is removed from power democratically, and then the new power moves to criminalize, marginalize, and even, if they can, imprison and neutralize the people they have just defeated.
Yeah.
I agree with you, it's not the same as the generalissimos that we used to have, but it is the beginning of a soft dictatorship at least.
Yes, it is, but there is also something to be said about how those new governments are going to be to sustain governability. So in the case of dictatorship, you have governability through basically force. In these new cases, I think what's puzzling as well is that there is some degree of support for the Macri government in the case of Argentina. It's less so in the case of Temer in Brazil. And certainly, well, it was a different case, the one of Paraguay. But sometimes what you also find is that this new right is actually being popular among a section of the population. That was also the case with the old military dictatorships. But the problem of governability is not a problem just for the left, but it's also a problem for the new governments. How the hell they are going to stay in power? It's still an open question.
Did the left make, and I'll tell you before you answer, I think the answer to it is yes. Did the left make a series of bad decisions? Were they guilty of some of the failures, and worse than failures, that their opposition accused them of?
The most common thing for the left-center, like the left-center reading of the pink tide, is to say precisely that. The pink tide is, first of all, the product of successful social movements, like that in 2000s managed to defeat neoliberalism, and then gave birth to these new governments, right? And now they made many mistakes, or they were unable to deal with, I suppose, with corruption in their governments, or they were unable to deal with some other new forces that were threatening them, such as the US or the new right. Yeah.
The US, that's what I'm particularly interested.
Yeah.
Have they perhaps focused more on form rather than its structural contents, and that's why is fading?
Yes, I think, well...
This anti-neoliberalism, anti-US domination.
Well, yeah, I mean, of course, the political incidence of the US is constant in the region. There's nothing, I wouldn't say that it's a new thing or it has changed significantly. But where I was trying to go is, it's right, all those governments presented themselves as anti-neoliberal. And they were, in a way, the product of the struggles of the 90s. But I think that if you explain the pink tide this way, you can explain the rise of the pink tide, but you fail short in explaining its demise. So what went wrong? Did they betray the movements? Did they fail to do the right thing? Or were they defeated by the right? I think, so let's say another explanation is the right-wing explanation. These were just populist movements, rotten and crony capitalism, leadership that was completely personal. And so, in that sense, they can explain the demise, because it was about time in their explanation, but they can explain the rise. Like, why would someone took power if they were so rotten and corrupt and so on? So I think the way out of the puzzle is to see that the pink tide was not the successful product of social movements, but rather the response to social movements. So say the bourgeois response to social movements. So and if you look at especially throughout the region, the more radical the social movements managed to be, suppose Venezuela with the Caracazo, or Argentina in 2001, or maybe the case of Bolivia that have the war of water and then the war of gas. So the more radical the social movements, the more radical the products of them. Those cases, those countries who didn't have such an important mobilization, such as Brazil or Uruguay, then had really timid, like more kind of more close to neoliberal, but like social neoliberalism.
Isn't it the case that they just didn't change people's lives for the better enough?
Well,
and therefore they had no base
Apart from
to
Venezuela.
hold on to them.
Yeah, Venezuela is a different case always. It is true they didn't do that, but I think they were there to do so, because of course they all came at a moment of a large commodity boom. So the region was having more money than usually, and there was certainly some we could say moderate, but some could say that's what we could do. Like there was redistribution of money certainly, and if you compare people's well-being in the 90s and in the 2000s, you can say most people's lives improved. What they didn't do was just like any kind of structural transformation, and they came. I think one of the main things they did was institutionalize and demobilize the social movements. So what used to be quite active social movements were one way or the other incorporated into the state, and the state began to handle their demands. So some people in Brazil speak of the pasteurization of the social movements. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's an interesting image of how what actually happened. So I think if you look at that, then the end of the pink tide comes with the end of the commodity boom. So the capacities of redistribution becomes way less. You have less capacity to redistribute than in the past. And the second thing is that you have managed in 10 years to institutionalize most of the conflict.
Isn't it the case that amongst the pink tide there was a lot of talk of a revolution, but there wasn't really a revolution? This was moderate reformism, and that moderate reformism didn't alter things enough to create. Well, I had the extraordinary good fortune to be part of a conversation with Fidel Castro and the late President Hugo Chavez, in which the Comandante Castro said, you don't need to talk about socialism all the time. Just do good things, and then people, when they like them, explain, this is actually socialism. I suppose the question in the time we've got left is, can the left come back? Will the pinks be back, at least?
Yes, I think that the left will need to reconstruct itself in, not just in Latin America, but everywhere. And I would say it can certainly come back in Latin America once it's able to show the limits of more neoliberalism and more austerity, which is the only proposal the ruling classes seems to have. So it's actually a challenge, but I hope there is a space for that.
Well, that's an encouraging note. What about Nicaragua, just in 30 seconds?
Okay.
Is Daniel back in something like the previous guise?
I think he's back in something like the previous guise, but that's just in 30 seconds.
What an excellent answer. Dr. Juan, thanks for coming on board the Sputnik.
Thank you, and thanks for the audience.
And now it's your turn to tell us what you think through the portals of social media. What's rattling, Gayatri?
So on the big scandal of the pension theft, Ricardo Picasso says, well, Tory MPs could have a whip round and come up with most of the £8 billion there and then.
Do you know, 8 billion from areas that have been economically devastated for 30 years.
And will be for generations.
Utterly transformative. And yes, this is an ongoing theft. This is stealing 50% of the surplus of a pension fund of workers who die early, and therefore a pension fund that doesn't usually have to pay out very much.
And on post-Olympic Brazil and the decline of pink tide, Euroman and activist says, well, Brazil has interference from USA regime since 1960, which means millions of dollars were sent to the Brazilian military.
Oh, billions. There's an awful lot of coffee in Brazil, an awful lot of corruption too.
Well, that's all the tweets that we have for today.
Which, alas, means that's the end of the show.
You can stay in touch with us on social media through Twitter at RT_Sputnik or on Facebook, Sputnik on Russia Today. It's goodbye from me, Gayatri.
And from me, George Galloway. It's been marvellous.